And now I call on Srishti for introducing our next session. Srishti, all yours.
Thank you, Prakash. So for this session, we have a very special speaker. He is the co-founder of BEST, Behavioral Economics and Data Science team, professional development chair at Harvard BISG. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Marco Casarco as he takes us through behavioral economics, its review, principles, limits, and futures in a post-COVID world.
Well, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you, the organizers of the NowFest, for the invitation to give this brief lecture. Well, so far, I can imagine this event have dealt with many topics related to behavioral science, most of them some applications to real-life situations, especially during the current context. But this time, I would like to come back a little bit to give a step back to the principles, to the basics, in order to understand what are the theories behind behavioral economics, and in that way to understand better its limits and also its future challenges. So let me start with this question. This is something maybe most of the people who are economists or who are related to the economic science don't think too much about it. But if you think a little bit more, there are several other social scientists who actually deal with this problem and who consider that people are usually not completely rational. Think about this problem, this dilemma. Maybe you have already heard about it, but let me introduce to the ones who maybe don't know about it. Imagine you are someone who is watching a train, who is passing through a road, and if you leave the situation as it is, it will happen that the train will crash 5 people who are somehow trapped in the road. However, you have the opportunity, you have the decision to maybe push certain button and to turn the train to another road in which it may not crash 5 people who are there, but it may crash 1. So the question is, would you decide to push the button, or maybe you would just leave the situation as it is? Even though for most economists, also of course thinking about or taking into consideration an utilitarian perspective, it may seem something very easy to decide. Actually, most people don't find that easy. That's what is called a dilemma. It is something that entails some kind of very complex meditation within your brain before having you to decide which choice would you pick. Let's think in another way, trying to get some ideas from one presentation Professionality Shows some years ago. You may remember these two persons. One of them is Mother Teresa, who once said, "If I look at the masses, I will never act. But if I look at individual, I will." And you may also know Joseph Stalin, who once said, "A single death is a tragedy. A million deaths is just a statistic." So, with these quotes, we also get this idea that, when we are dealing with individuals, with persons, sometimes, we cannot count them as in an utilitarian way when we are dealing with how each of them impacts our choices of our decision making. Sometimes, just to focus in one individual will trigger more, will trigger more concern for us, and that will, make us choose something that maybe we wouldn't if we just consider like just a very simple number that could tell us something about, human lives or maybe about masses, but we do not perceive it that way. We just thinking about just as a number. So what I'm trying to get with these examples is to try to show you how complex sometimes is decision-making processes within each individual. However, within the microeconomic domain, we do know that, well, since we try to deal a little bit with mathematics and try to model certain types of behavior, we had to create some actions in order to describe better people's decision-making and people's preference, and to try to predict them in a better way. So some of these axioms, as of course, this one of completeness, also that of transitivity, this one of continuity, and this of independence. One example, for instance, taking the one of transitivity, is that if you prefer apples to orange and orange to bananas, then of course you will prefer apples to bananas, right? So preference would be transitive. However, as you can imagine, there are some instances that researchers and mostly behavioral economics and psychologists have found that these axioms, of course, doesn't hold in real life. So this comes to the next chapter of my talk, which are the theories behind behavioral economics and how these theories give us like a better insights to understand human behavior, after all. One of them is bounded rationality, proposed by Herbert Simons several years ago. You may imagine like this. Of course, we often think of ourselves as, you know, a rational individual, this nomenclature of Homo economicus, who maximizes his profits and who handles all relevant information without any problem. However, you know, real life have shown us that most of the time we have some limited rationality. You know, we also have limited willpower, and also we have some type of limited selfishness. So just taking this as an example, this has been called by some circles of Homero economicus in contrast to the Homo economicus. But going out one step beyond, this bounded rational individual does not maximize, but instead it has this type of behavior that Herbert Simon described as satisficers, you know, are individuals who may not seek the best out of all the options, but just are trying to look for some options and try to get the one that passes certain level of threshold that you may have. And when you reach that threshold, of course, you stick to that option and you don't look for anything more, because we are restricted not only by time, but only by our own nature, that we cannot evaluate all the options that we usually have available. So, just to give this insight, Herbert Simon did not only give this very nice theories for the behavioral economics field or also for the psychological field, but actually for computer science. And you can think about satisficers like an algorithm in which you assess certain situations, you get some cues as much as your brain allows you to get, and then you pick one option and you evaluate if it passes certain threshold, right? If it passes, you stick to that option, and if it doesn't, then you come back to the beginning and you try once and once again until you have the one that you can stick to. Let's also have this kind of brief review about cognitive biases. I do know you all know about these optical illusions, right? You all know that these tables are exactly the same, and you can see it here. However, this is not what I want to show. What I want to show to you is that even though you rationally know that these have exactly the same size, if I came back a little bit, you will still notice that one of them is, of course, larger than the other one. So let's look at this other example, for instance. You still perceive as the circle on your right is still larger than the one on the left, right? You do know, you still perceive that, even though you know that both might be the same. And of course, both are the same. But you cannot trick your brain to still lead you to certain type of perception, because, you know, we need to have certain types of roles of thumb by which to take decisions, because we are constrained. We cannot take all the information available each of the time. So taking this example to a more precise context, you can also think of some of the experiments made by Kant and Versky some years ago, by which, for instance, they show certain people this kind of mathematical problem, and people usually guess, you know, that the multiplication result will be something like this. But then they also show this same, a similar problem to another group of people, which instead they had as the first information available, you know, the first numbers. Instead of starting from 8, they started from 1, 2, 3. And these people instead, they expected the result to be around 500. This is very tricky because the real result actually, you know, it's like around 40,000. So both groups underestimate the real result, but the one that was show, the smallest values were kind of anchored to give like a smaller response compared to the previous group. So there are several examples like this, and there are actually some people who are trying to create like a kind of cognitive bias codex and try to classify them in order to see if it's possible to get to a general theory to explain most of them. It's kind of an open question. Most people think that it's not possible, but well, since we are we do have researchers working on this, who knows? Maybe we can reach something closer to that in the upcoming years. So well, another example I want to show you is this called framing effect, and maybe this will sound a little bit like the current situation, but I promise it was not something intended. Imagine you are the Minister of Health of a small nation of 600 people, and you must face a foreign disease. And then your scientists give two options or medications, let's say two options or vaccines. One of them, option A, will allow 200 people to survive, and another will allow with one-third of probability that 600 of your people will survive and 2/3 that nobody will survive. So the question is, which option would you pick? So in this example, most people prefer certain option, okay? That I will show you at the end. But then to another group, the researchers propose to pick instead between two other options. Option X, which will let 400 people to die, and then option Y, which will let with 1/3 of probability that nobody will die, and 2/3 of probability that 600 people will die. So then, let's see the results. In the first case, the first scenario, more than 70% of people choose option A. However, in the second scenario, only around 20% of the individuals pick option X. What is very interesting here, if you compare option A and option X, you will see that they are exactly the same option. They do represent exactly same objective amount, because if you have 600 people in your nation, if 200 survive, then 400 will die. So it's very interesting how people have reversed their preference just in the way the answer was framed. In the second case, it was framed as a loss, so people somehow, move away from that option because they were somehow maybe scared to have this kind of a certain number of individuals that for sure were going to die in case of this option was taken. So this experiment somehow led to some of the insights that after a while led to one of the main models, one of the main theories behind behavioral economics, that is called prospect theory. That, trying to sum up a little bit, it basically tells that you always have like a point of reference by which you consider something as a gain or as a loss. And we often value losses more than their corresponding gains, okay? Of course, thinking about absolute value. So losses have like a larger impact to our minds compared to their corresponding gains. Let me show you another model, which is also very important within the behavioral economics field, which is the hyperbolic discounting. So imagine, for instance, that you are a student and you have an exam tomorrow at 11 a.m. and imagine it's night today, right? So you're very tired, but you promise yourself that you will wake up very early at 5 a.m. To study, okay? So you wake up very early and then you will study because you will get a higher utility for your exam, of course. So of course, waking up early will create some disutility to you, but then taking the exam will of course give you some higher utility. So then you decide that you will accommodate to that, right? So once you wake up, so it's not night anymore, right now it's early in the morning, you should stick to your decision and then waking up, in a happy way. However, do you think that really happens? Actually not. Most of the people do have problems to wake up early once the time arises. And how could we explain that? Well, of course, not with an exponential model, but most with an hyperbolic discounting model, which are the yellow and red curves over there. So for instance, with a hyperbolic discounting model, you will see that once you are already in the moment, when the time that wake up have already come, you will have a different discount function, starting from that, because it's not regular the function anymore. So in that way, you can see that there could be cases in which before, when you have, this yellow discounting function, you have stick to certain choice, but once the time comes and maybe the smaller, sooner option is closer to you, that will entail a higher effect on your decision making. That's why, waking up and study once it is already the time to do so will have such an impact on you that you may be considered to maybe postpone a little bit your alarm and wake up a little early, even though the night before, you have taken a different choice. So that's another example of preference reversal, for instance. And let me show you something else, something very interesting about how behavioral economics also could relate to other social sciences and also natural sciences to explain certain types of behavior.
The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber.
You have
the one on the right
two monkeys
is the
here
one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece he eats.
And the other one will receive grapes.
The other one getting grape.
In this case, grapes are higher valued by the monkeys, are like dollars. And cucumbers may be like your national currency.
The other one needs to give a rock to us. And
so,
that's what she does.
See? And the one on the right gets
and she eats it. The other one sees that.
The grapes.
She gives a rock to us now. Gets again cucumber.
Cucumbers instead. So the one on the right is like being paid for his task. Let's say $100, but on the one on the one on the right is paid $100, and the one on the left maybe is paid like 100 of your national currency.
And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Well, so what I'm trying to say with all these examples is, how complex decision making it is sometimes, and how we need to also rely on other sciences to get some insights to better explain how to deal with it. But well, moving forward, we also have, several nudges and applications coming from behavioral economics to public policy to get, certain types of outcomes. One of them are the ones that are inspired by the Ulysses contrast. You all maybe know about the story of Ulysses, the Greek warrior who needed to came back to his town, and since he was prepared to pass through the island of the Sirens, he commanded his friends to, in order to pass this very difficult task, because the Sirens were the ones who sing, and they, with their songs, create this kind of magic that trick the sailors to go to the island and then to die because they shock the rocks over there. So Ulysses, before being exposed to the songs of the Sirens, he asked his men to stick him to the to that stick and to stay over there without the opportunity to escape. So it's a type of method in which you anticipate the moment when you will have certain temptation, and you force yourself to stay to certain option in order to avoid the opportunity to deviate once the time comes. So let's imagine, for instance, if you are a student once again, and you are so distracted by by Facebook or by other social networks that you may use, and you need to study for an exam, and you know that once you arrive to your home, you will have your Wi-Fi on, and you may be prone to enter and to not study. Then maybe you can call your father, right before going to your home, to ask him maybe to disconnect the Wi-Fi. So once you are at home, you will still have the opportunity to connect your Wi-Fi. You maybe just need to plug in, but since you are a step farther from that option, somehow it helps you to fall into that temptation and to stick to your original idea, the one that you had in mind, the one that was more rational to you, that was to study, right? Before falling to temptation. So, well, such as that, there are several other instances, such as the cases of the default when it was used in some circumstances, for instance, to encourage organ donation, right? In the first group of countries, the default option was to no donate and to, just mark in one square if you want to, but in the second group of the ones that are in green of countries, actually it was the reverse. The default option was to donate, and if you don't want to do so, you can also stick to one option to step back, right? And this change in default, creates such a huge difference that it's so impressive how, it could be used in also other several instances. There's also price anchoring, in which you may show one price that may be higher before revealing the real price that you want to get, and you want to have your audience to have in mind. There's also this very fun decoy effect that was studied by Dan Ariely in one of the Economist subscription methods, by which they allow to take the online subscription, then the print subscription, and then the print plus the online subscription. But the interesting thing was these two last options, if you can see also in the image, were exactly the same. So nobody rationally will pick the one in the middle, because you can also get the online subscription by the same price. So when he tried this with his students, he got exactly that nobody was a fool. So nobody stick with the option in the middle. So then he asked, why are the individuals who create this kind of subscription options using that option in the middle? So if nobody picks, maybe we can just delete it. And that was somehow a mistake, because that option actually gives something important. That option was actually a decoy, because when you take away that option, actually most people, doesn't have the third option enhanced as much. So they, for instance, in the second scenario, they pick the first option more than in the first one. And of course, you can also try to express this in other circumstances, such as real life, right? When a couple of girls, or a group of girls were shown to choose between these two men, A and B, of course, they didn't know which to pick. But if instead they will show, like an I minus, like, someone similar to A, sorry, but slightly, uglier, then of course A will be enhanced, and most girls will pick A. And of course, if you do the opposite, you present like slightly uglier version of B, of course most people will choose B, well, most of the girls. And then this, as he expressed in one of his talks, this maybe gives you some lessons about how you can act in real life. So if you want to go to a party and you want to meet some girls or boys, you may need to pick one of your friends to go with you, someone who may look like you, slightly to be similar like you, but slightly uglier, in order to to remark you the best. And also, if your friend asks you for something similar, then you may know what your colleague or your friend thinks about you compared to himself or herself. But well, there are several other effects that are very interesting also to mention. The endowment effect as well, right? In which you are shown two items, and the one that you possess for a while, then you will start to give like a higher value to that item, right? Compared to another one that you may not have the possession for a time. So yeah, I have tried to give a brief overview of all these kind of effects that somehow could be used to design some, not just some policy interventions that have been very useful so far until very recently. However, I also want to finish with this last section, which is that even though behavioral economics have provided many insights to public policy, there are also some limits and also some challenges, especially during this pandemic that has shown us many things that we still need to learn to make better our field. There is one paper, one very interesting by Hamel and Matke from the last year, that compares the effect of different nuts that were applied in different types of contexts. For instance, within the health context, within the environmental context, within the policy-making context, right? And they also show us, how different types of nudge have different effects. So you see in the last section below how defaults, for instance, have shown like a very high impact. But you also have like, these other examples, like maybe disclosure or the change of effort or simplification may not have, has such impact as the first default case. So there are still many things that we still do need to explore, and also we do need to remind that these effects are still marginal. They are very valuable because most of the time they are very cost effective. The cost is very, very low, if no almost zero. But we still are far away from trying to create very large change of behavior, at least in a large scale and very quickly. We are still limited to accomplish something like that. And in this kind of thought, there were also some opinions from some behavioral economists, such as Baron Gowry, who was once the lead economist of the behavioral economics group of the World Bank, who wrote some months ago that behavioral public policy was facing a crisis because of this that I'm telling, right? We were not prepared to some circumstances that were better understood by us just right now during the pandemic. One of them is one that may come from my home country, Peru. For instance, we could design several nudges to try to make people to go to shopping just once a week. However, try to see these statistics and try to focus on this number 49. That refers to the households who have refrigerators in Peru. So even though if we want to create some nudges to make people to go shopping once a week, if we do not take into consideration that only half of the population have refrigerators at home, it will be something useless. Because they still have some primary needs to accomplish before we can try to do something further. Also think about this. If we try to design some general interventions to make people to wash their hands, thinking in a global scale to say the same for everyone, we may not reach like a higher percent of the population who may not have access to good sources of water, such as people in the Amazon of Peru. So we need to think, deeper in which kind of population we are trying to approach when we design certain nudges. Let's have this for a while into consideration. What was happening also in China at the same time, right? So just mention a little bit about technology. They were starting to use these health codes, in order to map how risky you were about contracting COVID based on how close you were to other people who may have already had COVID. Or you also have these heat maps which show the concentration of people on the street, which of course were available from many years ago and were used for other instances, but well proven to be very useful within the current pandemic. So you may ask, why I'm showing you this? So let me, you can wait for a while and we will come back to this later. So there is something going on here. As I told you when I was explaining this example of Peru, we do need to think more about, the precision of the type of population that they are dealing with. So something that we can take into advantage are the social big data that, the world is creating right now. For instance, in the internet, in just 1 minute, we do have all these large amounts of data from Facebook, from Netflix, from Google, even from, from Tinder, if you're familiar to that app, from YouTube, etc. And in this same scale that we can think globally, there are also, large amount of data that are being created in China. And then, for good or bad, they are being used to somehow to have like a better idea of which type of population are, the ones who walk on the streets or who are in certain in certain places. So even though that could be something to a little bit, of course, worrisome sometimes, it also, if it's used in the right way, it also will also allow to to have a better understanding of the population that we are dealing with, and to maybe create more precise nudging mechanism to certain circumstances, right? So you also have this example, for instance, going on in China, these social credit systems, right? Which were like some examples in which, going beyond the usual credit system that the banks use, people will have certain social scores there, or certain types of behavior, or certain types of decision making, where they doing certain, I don't know, shopping, that they show maybe that they prefer some national products compared to international products, etc. Right? That's still like in development, but it may provide also some very interesting insights of a better understanding of population. Something else that I want to mention is also going in this line of having like a deeper understanding of individuals is what neuroscience of decision making can tell us right now, right? We as an economist, we usually see that these phenomena are, that the phenomenon of decision making may be very simple for us because we just evaluate what people decide at the end, but sometimes we don't think how complex is the decision circuit within the brain, which is actually very, very complex. And it will be very interesting to try to go deeper on that, to better understand people's choices, and then to better also characterize why we decide and in which circumstances we decide certain things and not others, right? So, trying to finish a little bit, I also want to show you this kind of connection that behavioral economics could have to another trend that is very interesting nowadays, which is the one of artificial intelligence. And I want to show you this very brief commercial that is very enjoyable.
Professor Richard Thaler, you are called the father of behavioral economics.
I've been called a lot of things.
I have read all of your books.
Did you learn anything?
I learned that humans are complicated.
We're emotional, absent-minded, and we make some really bad decisions.
My trade-off, analytics can help companies make better decisions. But I am still learning what makes people tick.
What makes you tick, Watson?
Natural language processing, reasoning algorithms, statistical parsing.
Now you're just showing off.
Okay, so why I show you Richard Thaler, and also I was mentioning some of the Chinese apps. Well, last year, Richard Thaler came to have the knowledge of some of these apps that were going on in China. And he came up with some intuition that I also had some years ago when I also get to know about this type of information collection that was happening in China. The opportunity that all this data could create to a behavioral economics. I don't know, it's something worrisome, because if it's used in a bad way, of course, it deals with privacy issues, and of course, you can use to coerce individuals' behavior, and that may not be good. But if we remember the principle of behavioral economics, that one that says that we can use nudging as a way to avoid more coercive methods to change behavior, because nudging also allows people to still preserve their freedom of choice, then we can say that in these circumstances, in a world of lot of data, it might be wise to make a better use of all that data, and of course with the right with the locks in order to prevent any privacy issue, but also to have nudging as a better resource that could also make people reach the types of behaviors that we want, but at the same time having in consideration that people are different. And if people are different and different groups are have different characterization, then we need to apply nudging in a very precise and different way to each of them in that group. So that's one of the lessons that comes from this current situation. And let's see what technology will prove to us in the coming years. And we will see, and we were very excited to see what the field will tell us in the future. And I hope you also will be interested to follow about this. So well, that's it, at least for me, and thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting and I could provide some also nice insights to you this time. So thank you all, and see you next time.